Well, welcome to Sea Files, folks. Thanks for joining me. I am reading The Battle for Christmas, a Pulitzer Prize finalist by Stefan Nissenbaum, A Cultural History of America's Most Cherished Holiday. It's a history of Christmas in America. This is what the book looks like. So, a quick announcement before I get back into this book. The next two books I have chosen to read. The next one is going to be On the Christian Life, New Translation, John Calvin. It is a section out of the Institutes of the Christian Religion by Calvin. It's just a small section put in modern English uh, about how to live the Christian life. And it's a short book, it'd be a short read. And then after that, I'm going to do Heaven Misplaced, Christ's Kingdom on Earth by Douglas Wilson. And it's also, as you can see, a thin book, and it would be a quick read. So I hope to maybe a month or less on this and a month or less on this because I mean, if I just sat down and just read through them, it wouldn't take long, but doing the videos, it takes longer. So this one I hope to finish by the end of February, and we are in February now. So we got to get started because the clock's ticking. Here we go. Now, earlier we were reading about Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and a little bit about the economic philosophies behind uh, Scrooge and Cratchit in the story and the economic conditions of the time that Dickens wrote that novel, A Christmas Carol, and how it relates to the novel. And it was a fascinating read. So if you want to go back and look at the last reading of this book on my channel, they're numbered, so it's easy to go back and find it. That's a really interesting read. But we're going to pick up on page 231 and I need more light. There we go. That helps. Hold on. There we go. All right. This is going to be Charles Loring Brace, Newsboys, not the singing group, and the Children's Aid Society. There we go. As late as the early 1850s, the major charitable institutions in cities like New York were of two sorts, either municipal agencies such as the Almshouse and the Workhouse for Adults and the City Nursery for Children, or arms of the city's churches, which established missions to the urban poor. There were 76 of these missions operating in 1865. These institutions did not disappear, but during the 1850s, they were supplemented by a new set of private philanthropic organizations dedicated exclusively to serving impoverished groups. At the same time, several church missions became quasi-autonomous operations. One of the first and most famous of these was the Five Points mission founded in 1852 by the Ladies' Home Missionary Society, a Methodist group, and located in one of the city's most blighted and dangerous areas. The Five Points was the site of a notorious gang war in 1857. Together with a similar agency, the Five Points House of Industry. Founded in 1853, these missions offered charitable relief to neighborhood families and provided children with classes that taught them industrial or domestic skills. Increasingly, these organizations came to focus their energies on a single group within the neighborhood they served, impoverished children. Uh, and very soon, organizations began to emerge that were devoted exclusively to children. The most effective and aggressive of these agencies, and probably within a decade or two, the single largest and best known charitable organization in the United States, was the Children's Aid Society, established in 1853 under the guiding influence of the young former Charles Loring Brace. Brace came to the CAS from the Five Points mission, where he had worked in 1852 during the year that followed his visit to Germany. It was the end point of an 8-year period that Brace spent in seeking a clear vocation for himself. Born in 1826 in Litchfield, Connecticut, of old New England stock, his father later became principal of the Hartford Female Seminary, where Catherine and Harriet Beecher served as teachers. Brace graduated from Yale in 1846 and returned there a year later to study theology. Ambitious to make his way in a more cosmopolitan setting, he also studied at the Union Theological Seminary in New York. But he began to harbor sympathies for abolitionists and other reformers, including the European radicals who were leading the revolutionary movements of 1848. Late in 1849, Brace visited New York's municipal facilities on Blackwell's Island, where he preached to the poor in the almshouse and met with prisoners and ill prostitutes. It was like a conversion experience. I never in my whole life, I'm sorry, I never in my whole nature so stirred up within me. I never had my whole nature so stirred up within me, he reported, as at what met my eyes in those hospital wards. Early the next year, Brace embarked on the European visit that brought him to Berlin in November, ostensibly to continue his theological studies. It was in Berlin, a month after his arrival, that he witnessed the German Christmas celebration he would later write about. But his sympathy for the oppressed was very much alive, the oppressed being the poor. And while touring Hungary in the spring of 1851, he was actually imprisoned for a month on charges of aiding the Hungarian nationalist revolutionaries led by Lajos Kossuth. Brace returned to New York after being released through the efforts of the U.S. minister and wrote a book about his experiences. But now he had finally determined what he wished to do with his life, hopefully to stay out of jail. He would dedicate himself to working for the poor. Well, I would have come to the same conclusion based upon what I was just reading. In that way, he would be able to combine his religious commitment and training with his progressive secular politics. In 1852, Brace began working for the recently founded Five Points Mission, but left the next year in order to establish the Children's Aid Society, the institution with which he remained associated for the remaining 33 years of his life. As the executive secretary of the CAS, Brace was an early representative of an emerging social type in American history, and also a new group in the history of Christmas patronage, the salaried managerial class. As a matter of pragmatic principle, the Children's Aid Society devoted its work exclusively to young people. Brace had come to the firm conclusion that targeting adults was virtually useless, like pouring water through a sieve. As he once put it, all too often adults wasted charitable relief on alcohol or worse. Moreover, whatever assistance they received, and on this point, Brace's ideas resemble that of many modern conservatives, only created a sense of dependency that further ensured their ongoing pauperization. Brace was persuaded that the only hopeful field was among the young. If one worked exclusively with children, he believed crime might possibly be checked at its very beginnings, and the seed of future good character in order and virtue be widely sown. Brace carried this principle very far. He decided not only that adults could not be part of the solution to the problem of poverty, but also that they constituted the immediate source of the problem. It was ironically the family life of New York's poor population that was destroying the character of its children. Brace had long been deeply aware, as home life in Germany revealed, of the power of family life to mold the character of children for better or for worse. Indeed, he was so sensitive to the family's influence that, as we have seen, he even felt that middle class American families were failing to offer the genial, nurturing environment necessary to develop healthy adults. But the families of the poor were worse than inadequate. They were, as Brace put it, actual poison for their own children. Brace argued that this was true of mothers as well as fathers. In making such an argument, he was confronting the heart of the reigning domestic ideology, the belief that all mothers could be counted on by their very natures to nurture their children through thick and thin. Brace was prepared to attack this belief almost head on. At Christmas 1855, he published in several New York newspapers a plea for charity that consisted of several little for Christmas. One of these scenes pictured a proud and respectable young mother who had been reduced to poverty by a combination of hard times and her husband's drinking. That was a familiar 19th century scenario. But Brace went further. He argued that the young mother had lost her self respect. She had even lost the last thing a woman of her former respectable habits loses, the pride in neat appearance. And he added, if she could but see it, it is just such dowdiness which seems which sends the husband to the dram shop instead of home. He was blaming her husband's alcoholism on her lack of pleasant appearance in how she dressed. Incredible. Brace concluded that it would be of little avail to offer assistance to this pathetic woman. Quote, the husband will probably die a drunkard, and the young wife, who had left comfort and home for his poverty, will either kill herself or perish of a broken heart. End quote. But then there were the children. Quote, there is the hope. Who will aid us in doing something for them? End quote. Brace used such accounts to make a radical argument. It was not enough to help the children. They actually had to be separated, permanently so, from their parents. In another of his 1855 Christmas scenes, this one titled The Cold Home, Brace contrasted a pair of tidy, sweet children with their chilly mother and her cheerless house. Let me pause there for a second. There is a picture of him, Charles Loring Brace. This woodcut was taken from a picture made late in Brace's life. Hopefully I can get it on. There it is. That's him right there. There you go. All right, now that's the culprit. No, just there we go. All right. I have a dry sense of humor, folks. Sorry. Just gonna have to deal with it. In another of his 1855 Christmas scenes, this one titled The Cold Home, Brace contrasted a pair of tidy, sweet children with their chilly mother and her cheerless house. He had tried to persuade the mother to let the girls attend an industrial school, offering to provide them with clothing if they would do so. And he promised that the boy should find a home if he would come to our office. Brace was adamant. Though for her pure young children, too much could hardly be done in such a woman herself, there is hardly any confidence to be put. And he confidently generalized from this woman's case. In 9 cases out of 10, it is probable some cursed vice has thus reduced her, and that of if her children be not separated from her, she will drag them down too. So Brace devised a new scheme. It involved persuading parents to send their children to the Children's Aid Society or persuading the children themselves to go there in order to ship them out of the city altogether to new homes in the American West, in villages with stable families, ample opportunities for employment, and the kind of individualistic ethos that would offer the boys fertile soil to develop their competitive tendencies into socially productive channels. Manless, manless land for landless men was a slogan of the movement. Manless land for landless men. To help my throat. Been reading a lot. All right, here we go. In its first 4 decades, the placing out scheme, it would later be dubbed the Orphan Train program, managed to transport some 90,000 boys to new homes and lives in the West. So that's how we conquered the West. Okay. And it helped bring international renown to Charles Loring Brace. In opting for this strategy, Brace had come to embrace the qualities of competitiveness and self-reliance that he sensed in many of New York's poor children, children who had been thrown on their own devices. He saw such behavior as a sign of potential ambition that healthfully channeled could transform bad habits into productive ones. Even in home life in Germany, Brace had acknowledged that self-reliance was a virtue. In America, a boy is an independent, self-reliant man when he is still in leading strings in Germany. But in that book, he had seen self-reliance only as a compensation, and a partial one at that, for the absence of strong family ties between American children and their parents. Now, as Secretary of the Children's Aid Society, Brace paid more attention to encouraging self-reliance than to fostering family ties. Knowing that many of New York's poor children could be enticed with relative ease to leave home, Brace put to practical use what he had previously lamented as the weakness of family ties among American youth. He reported in just those terms the mood among a group of boys leaving New York for the West in 1855. All seemed as careless at leaving home forever as if they were on an excursion to Hoboken. Life in the labor-starved, Protestant-dominated West, he argued, would be likely to transform a rough, thieving New York vagrant into an honest, hardworking Western pioneer. According to the historian Paul Boyer, Brace did not systematically track the later careers of the orphan train riders. He, quote, showed little interest in determining whether the boys he sent west actually became settled members of their communities. It was enough that they were being absorbed into that active, busy population. But it would be a mistake to think that this complex man had turned into a simple apologist for the spirit of free enterprise. Despite his enduring admiration for the independent human spirit, Charles Loring Brace never lost the deep distrust of 19th century capitalism that informed home life in Germany. At the very height of the Gilded Age in 1882, he published a work of theology that attempted to trace the changing role of Christianity in human history. In that book, Gesta Christi, Brace noted tentatively that the New Testament itself was permeated by a certain tone that was, if not of communism, at least in favor of greater distribution of wealth than would suit modern ideas. Jesus and the apostles almost denounced the rich, he wrote, and their sympathies are strongly with the working classes. They urge continually the diffusion of property in whatever way would benefit the world. At another point in the same book, Brace insisted that there was in many of the aspirations and aims of communism a certain marked sympathy or harmony with the ideas of Christianity. But he was also quick to add that nothing, however, in Christ's teachings tends towards any forcible interfering with rights of property or encourages dependence on others. As that final clause suggests, Jesus might be a socialist, but Brace would not relinquish the idea that he was also a man of self-reliance. Here as clearly as anywhere in his writings may be found a clue to the coherent philosophy that Brace never quite managed to articulate. But it was not philosophy that earned Brace the respect of the philanthropic community, in any case. It was his practical organizational skills which did that, and his ability to deal effectively with poor children themselves. Those interpersonal skills came increasingly to the fore over the years. From the beginning, the Children's Aid Society did not restrict itself to sending children west, and by the 1860s, it was becoming clear that the supply of street children in New York far exceeded the demand for their labor on the farm. So the CAS came increasingly to focus its efforts on the industrial schools and lodging houses it had established in the city. The first and most successful of these local establishments, the one that captured the attention of the public and became Brace's personal pride and joy, was a lodging house designated specifically for a single subset of poor children, the city's newsboys. We have encountered newsboys before during the 1840s, shortly after they came into existence as a result of the development of an urban penny press, often homeless. They eked out their subsistence by hawking afternoon newspapers and extra editions on the streets of the city. By the 1850s, newsboys constituted a familiar and sometimes aggressive segment of the urban population, and they were notorious for their streetwise impertinence and for the racket they made at their beloved theater. Charles Loring Brace referred to them as a fighting gambling set, consisting largely of immigrant Irish Catholics. The newsboys seem to have spoken in an argot of their own, and they were usually known only by nicknames: Pickle Nose, Fat Jack, Mickety, Round Hearts, Know Nothing Mike, O'Neill the Great, Wandering Jew, even in one case, Horace Greeley. The Newsboys Lodging House that Brace set up in 1854 provided many of these boys with a stable household. In 1867, the Children's Aid Society was operating 5 such lodging houses in poor districts of New York, one of which was located at the corner of West 24th Street and 8th Avenue, just at the edge of the former Chelsea estate owned by Clement Clark Moore. The Newsboys became a source of special pleasure for Charles Loring Brace. Working with them became, for him, a secular version of the ministry to which he had originally intended to devote himself. From time to time, Brace even delivered brief sermons to his charges, non-sectarian sermons that avoided any effort to lure the always suspicious Newsies away from their Catholic heritage. He delivered one of these sermons at Christmas, emphasizing Jesus' humble birth and upbringing among common laboring people, and the fact that his own chosen ministry was to the great masses of mankind, the poor laboring people, just such as you are, boys. And in another sermon, Brace called Jesus the working man's friend. Guided by what was probably a combination of private admiration and pragmatic tactics, Brace dealt with these newsboys without sentimentality, without pretending that they embodied purity or selfishness. He came to relish what he saw as the independence, competitiveness, and signs of ambition that characterized the culture of newsboys, even the aggressive edge they displayed, and he worked to encourage those attributes. Whatever else they were, newsboys were by definition not beggars. They worked for their own support. The most successful among them earned as much as $3 a day and sometimes even more. The aspiring young author, Horatio Alger, spent several months in residence at the original Newsboys Lodging House, and he based several of his novels on that experience. Brace retained at the same time his earlier sense that the newsboys needed to grow up in an environment that was genial and cheerful, and he tried with considerable success to make every newsboys lodging house into just such an environment. Brace was skillful in dealing with newsboys on their own terms, and he made sure he hired a flexible and well-trained staff. Indeed, Brace, along with many others, admired the newsboys' independent spirit, their solidarity, and their internal code of honor. As one scholar has put it, newsboys inhabited a twilight realm somewhere between desperate poverty and democratic manhood. Brace knew better than to patronize the newsboys, and he even took pleasure in watching them ridicule any visiting speakers who did. The lodging houses were characterized, as Paul Boyer has put it, by the prevailing high spirits, the street slang, and the boisterous shouts of tough little gamins, totally unintimidated by the surroundings of a benevolent institution. Such gen- Such geniality satisfied Brace's deep craving for the unforced social warmth he had first encountered in Germany at Christmas time. So it may be no coincidence that the high point of the year at every newsboy's lodging house was the annual Christmas dinner. Those those dinners became a regular institution during the last 4 decades of the 19th century and were reported with relish in the press. Between 1870 or so and the early 1900s, the annual dinners at the original lodging house were regularly arranged and paid for by a wealthy New York businessman named William Fliss. Other prominent New Yorkers often agreed to host dinners at the other lodging houses. Theodore Roosevelt did so, for example, every year from 1870 to 1873, and on at least one of those occasions, the future president represented a $25 cash prize to a newsboy who had submitted the best essay in writing competition. Year by year, or year after year, New Yorkers read about the gusto and speed with which the newsboys consumed the food placed before them. As one report put it, dyspeptics, no, let me try it again. Dyspeptics who cannot enjoy the eating of a good Christmas dinner ought to make it a point to go to the newsboys' lodging house at 7 o'clock in the evening of Christmas Day and see the newsboys eat. Such accounts sometimes recorded exactly how much the boys consumed. In one year, when 450 boys were fed, it amounted to 670 pounds of turkey, 200 pounds of ham, 3 barrels of potatoes, 3 barrels of turnips, 200 loaves of bread, and 350 pies. Yeah, a teenage boy can eat you out of house and home, right? The reporter calculated this with mock precision as coming to 125, I'm sorry, 125th of their own weight. Only once in 1888 have I found an acknowledgement that something more serious may also have been at stake for the boys. Their stomachs were small with chronic hunger. The Christmas dinners were often described in military terms, as in 1888, when the story was labeled Newsboys Will Be Fed. They battle with a dinner and a, I'm sorry, they battle with a dinner and win a great victory. Or in 1890, the Newsboys' annual triumph over turkey and pie. The press accounts took equal delight in reporting the newsboys' raucous behavior on such occasions, their expertise in cutting such capers as only street Arabs know. But these high jinks seem never to have gotten out of hand, in part because of the skill with which the lodging house staff arranged matters, including even the placement of the tables. Claire is taken to have every seat at every table accessible to adults, so that in case any newsboy becomes intoxicated by the lavish display of viands and forgets how he should behave while at a banquet, he may be reached before he has filled the eyes of more than two of his neighbors with pie. The wisdom of this provision has been shown time and time again. All in all, such scenes can be seen as the infinitive fulfillment in a very different set of circumstances of the very Christmas fantasy that Charles Loring Brace had first described in Home Life in Germany, a scene of genuine, spontaneous cheer in which people did not seem to be enjoying themselves because it is a duty to be cheerful, but simply because they cannot help it. When we come back, we'll be on page 239, The Patient Poor. It's a long chapter, so I'm breaking it up into sections. How much more do we have to go? We got a ways to go in this chapter. Yeah. I think, however, in the next reading, we should be able to get all the way through it. Then on to chapter 7. So it looks like I could probably reach my goal by the end of February, because chapter 7 is the last chapter, and then there's epilogue, the ghost of Christmas past. So um moving right along. Soon we'll be in another book. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoy these readings, please like and subscribe. I'm just sharing a little bit of my reading to you here on YouTube. A little something different. Um, Not the constant drumming of news, the constant drumming of politics, the constant drumming of back and forth debates and anger, but something a little more relaxing and soothing for the mind and the soul. Thank you for joining me here on the Sea Files. We'll see you next time. And God bless and everyone stay safe out there.